Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph right middle of the page. That was a question of Rab Zera. Rab Zera wanted to know if somebody says, I will take a dove and a turtle dove, either one, and he brought the one that's in between, where the tips of the wings became colored, is the pshat that it's a third species altogether, and therefore you haven't fulfilled your neder, or is the pshat that we're not sure what his status is? So therefore, Manoshech, it's either a toyer or a b'nei yaina. If you brought it and you said, I will bring either a toyer or b'nei yaina, you will fulfill your mitzvah. So that was basically the question that we had. And we wanted to bring a raya from the fact that the pasuk has to come and exclude, it says in the Braise here that it comes to teach you, the pasuk will teach you that it has to be that if it's slightly a bit gold, it's not yaitzer. And from that, we want to bring a raya that it's a third species, and that's not yaitzer, because if you can tell me it's a suffix, why in the world would you need a pasuk to exclude that? And the Gemara concludes the pasuk is not coming to exclude that at all. In fact, it's only an asmachta. What the pasuk is coming to exclude is a bird that was involved in bestiality on the receiving end, or it was used for avodah zarah. And what's the chiddush? We already know that by all kabbanis. The chiddush here is because the pasuk compares. It says ki mashchasam behem, they're corrupted. Mum bum, they have a defect. So we would think that only those animals where mum is a problem. The problem is also mashchasam. Mashchasam, we said, is aroya, is erva, and mashchasam is avodah zarah. Since a bird does not, if you have a cataract, a bird with small limb doesn't really count. It's only if they're missing a limb. And Rashi says, because it says in the pasuk, hakrivei nolef hachasecha, would you bring this to the officer? So therefore, we would have thought, since ordinary movement don't count by bird, maybe it doesn't even matter if it's corrupt, if erva and all that, and the pasuk comes to exclude that they're not kosher at all. Nothing to do with the case of the bird that is right in between, the intermediate stage between a b'nei yaina and a yaina. Okay, so now we're up to the Gemara over here. So we haven't really resolved Rab Zera's question. Now we're up to the next question, Rab Zera. Similar idea, but a different. When it comes to animal by a lamb, the din is as follows. The first year of a lamb is called a kevis. It's a lamb. Once it's a bit over 13 months old, it's called an ayol, a ram. That month in between, the 13th month, called a palgus, like peleg, half and half. And the question here again is it a species all on its own, or is it just questionable whether it's still considered a lamb, the 13th month, or is this already the beginning of the ram period? And it has, therefore, a question based on that. About 7 lines to the bottom of the page. Rab Zera asked the question, if somebody says, Harei alai oilas behema, I will bring an oila from a behema, I'll bring a total offering on the Mizbeach. Mina, and I'm making myself a choice, I'm not sure. Mina ayil from a ram, that means 14 months and over. Or mina keves, or from a lamb, that means 12 months and under. But what he did bring was Vehevi Palvis. He brought this lamb that was the 13th month. And the question is, Vahu, do we say that he fulfilled his neder or not? Because he gave himself a choice, a lamb or a ram. Is the 13th month one or the other or not? So the Gemara says as follows. Eliba de Rabbi Yechanan, according to Rabbi Yechanan, who clearly learns that Palgus is a separate entity altogether, I never gave myself in my neder. I said either a kevis, a lamb, or an ayla ram. I did not say a palgus, so definitely I'm not yaitzer. There's no question. Loiti boilov. There's no question. The Omar, he said, very happy. It's a separate species altogether, and therefore it's not included. Itnan, we learned. It says, what happens if he says that in the following case, what happens that if you brought a carbon palgus, and then umevi olav niske ayil. Now, if you remember before, we learned in Gemara in Menachos of the different nesachim. So nesachim is made up of 3 parts. So you have the flour offering, which has flour and oil. And then you have wine separate that comes together. The quantity of wine is the same as the quantity of oil. And we said as follows. When it comes to a lamb, we bring 1 isarin of flour, but you bring a quarter of a hin, which is 3 lagin of oil, which makes it very watery, relatively speaking. When it comes to a ram, by a ram, you bring 2 isranim of flour, and you bring a third of a hin, which is 4 lagin. So instead of 3 lagin, you bring 4, but 4 lagin to 2 isranim of flour compared to a lamb, which is 3 lagin and 1 isarin of flour, which means that it's much thicker mixture. So the question is as follows: what happened was. So you're supposed to bring, right? If it's a lamb, you bring 3 lagin of oil to mix in, and then you bring separately 3 lagin of wine. If it's a ram, you bring 4 lagin of oil to mix in and 4 lagin of wine. And it says in the pasuk that oil ayil. So oil comes to include that a palgus also requires nesachim. So now, why would you need a pasuk? Somebody can please mute themselves. Why would you need a palgus? You need a pasuk, special palgus. But must be the palgus is not automatically included in a lamb. It's not automatically included in a ram, and therefore needs a special pasuk to include a palgus also to bring the sachim. So what happens is. So Amar Rabbi Yechon says oil ayil. The word oil ayil is what l'rabbi says a palgus. It comes to include a palgus. That if so it's clear that Rabbi Yechon holds that a palgus is a separate species, so you include it. If palgus would not be a separate species, we just don't know what it is, a lamb or a ram. What would we do? We would then take we'd take it two. We would treat it, will be machmir, we'll take the 4 lagin like a ram, and we will say, if it's a ram, fine, perfect, we have 4 lagin. If it's a ram, then 3 lagin, if it's a lamb only, this palgus, if state is like a lamb, we're going to say 3 lagin of it is going to be the carbon, is in the sachim, and 1 leg is in the dava, purely an extra add-on. So there's the fact that Rabbi Yechon said we need a special pasuk to include oil. Clearly means that he holds ayil as a separate entity. So if I made a neder, I'm going to bring a lamb or a ram, and you bring a palgus, you have not fulfilled your mitzvah. So our question is a liba the bar poda. Our question is according to bar poda. The Amar bar poda says we don't know what it is. So he says we don't know if it's a lamb or a ram. So what he says that what you do is he says it's only a suffix. So he says, "Ma'isi u'masna." You bring the 4 lagin and you make a tanai. And the tanai is you say, well, if it's a lamb, then 3 lagin are the lamb and 1 leg is in a dova, and if it's a ram, then it's 4 lagin. Now, even though you cannot give generally when you're given a dova, it has to be either a 3 lagin or 4 lagin or 6 lagin, like we learned in previous gemaras. But since you're already giving 3 and just adding on, you can do that. So, so the question is, do we say that when he made this tonight, do we say ayil v'keves masna? All he has in mind is either it's a suffix, whether it's an ayil or whether it's a keves, and basically he says, if it's an ayil, then all 4 lagin are the ayil, and if it's a keves, then only 3 lagin are the nesachim, and the extra leg is in the dava. But he does not talk about the palgus, because the palgus is a separate species altogether. But so the beberia masna doesn't include a barrier, or dilma beberia nami masna, or maybe it maybe since palgus is also a barrier, makes it tanai, and he said, yes, if it's a palgus, it's a separate barrier, and nowhere does the Torah say that, according to Rapoda, that a palgus needs nesachim. Not like Rabbi Yechon says the word oy, but nowhere the Torah say that palgus, and he's the word oy for another drasha. So nowhere does the Torah say that palgus requires nesachim, and therefore he'll say that if it's a palgus, then the entire 4 lagin is in a dava. So basically, does he have 3 things in mind? Does he have in mind the keves? If that 3 lagin is a keves, 1 leg is a dava. Does he have in mind the ayil? Then all 4 lagin are obviously in the sachim. And he has in mind maybe the palgus, because the palgus might be a separate entity. entity, and therefore there's no nesachim there at all, and if there's no nesachim by the palgus, then the four loigin are entirely anadava. And or no, we say that when you make the t'nai, you include that maybe it's not really a barrier from the atzma. It's either a kevis or an ayil, and that's it. And therefore, according to Bar Potter, we're trying to understand: does he learn that the palgus is a barrier or not? And therefore, and we're asking what happens in our case when he made a neder kevis or ayil and he gave a palgus. There's a Gemara teku. In this case here, it's a question. So no, but since we're not sure about Poda hold it's a barrier on its own, or whether it's just a suffix, an ayil, or a kevis, and therefore if you made a neder to bring a kevis or an ayil and you brought a palgus, according to Bar Poda, according to Rabbi Yechanan, there's nothing to talk about. You're not yoitze because it's a separate species. According to Bar Poda, we're trying to understand what he meant with the Tanai, whether it's treated like a separate species and therefore it's part of the Tanai that if it's a palgus, we're not giving any nesachim at all. It's only the davar. So therefore it's a separate. You're not yoitze in neder because you said kevis or ayil, or we say no, it's part of the suffix. You're not sure. And therefore, it's included in because it's either a kevis or an ayil, and you don't have to make a separate time for that. And therefore, in this case here, you will be yetzi neder. And we remain with a question:
what is the origin of the concept of the palgus in the Torah? Why can't we use exactly if it's 1 year, we take it. It's 1 year old. That's
well, we will learn out from the word oy. We learn out that from the word oy, we learn out that there's another thing called a palgus. So that's where we come from. That's where we come from. But we know that it's not called a kevis. Just a palgus, 13-month old, for whatever reason, that interim period is not a kevis. It's not a lamb. It's too big for a lamb. And nor is it, and how do we know that? I guess that's how it is. Just how it is. The question is halachically, how do we treat it? But by a lot in the animal world, I guess, I don't know, in the Goyish world, what would they call that? What's the interim between a lamb and a ram?
I think they sell it as a lamb in the butcher's shop because I think they get more for it.
Okay, could be, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, next question. Boy, Rab Zayda is asking a few questions. Next question. Now, we know when it comes to a taida, carbon taida, the animal you bring with it also 40 loaves of bread. 30 of them is matzah and 10 of them is chametz. So what happens? If a guy says, I'm taking upon myself, lachme toida, I'm going to bring 10 loaves of bread, either min hachametz, either I'm bringing it from chametz, or min hamatzah. No, I have a choice. I'm going to bring 10 loaves. I'm not sure yet which one I'm bringing, either chametz or I'm bringing matzah. And then he brought the heavy seer. Now, there are 3 stages when it comes on Plach. We learned machlekes are made about 3 stages. You have matzah, right? It's definitely matzah. The other end you have chametz, definitely chametz, and then in between you have a thing called seer, like yeast, and this seer or sourdough. So this seer is the in between stage, and we have machlekes Rab Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rab Meir, it's matzah, but when it starts getting pale, if the flour is just pale, no cracks or fissures or anything else, just pale, we say that's the stage of seer. And seer you have to burn, and number 1. And number 2, according to the mayor, seer you get malchus. But you won't get cutters because it's not really full chametz yet. It's like chametz nuksha, hard chametz. And then the next stage is when it's mamash chametz. So seer, according to the mayor, is you burn it, which everyone agrees, but also you get malchus for it. But it's not a full chametz, you won't get kares. What stage is seer? When the dough becomes pale. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says that no. He says that, firstly, he says, seer, you don't get malchus at all. It's only osir, you don't get malchus. And I hold that if it's only pale, it's still matzah. You need to start seeing cracks in the dough before you say, that's seer. And when all the cracks start meeting together and joining together, that's when we say it's chametz mamash. Okay, that's the machlekes Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So says the Gemara, says as follows. So what happened was he said I'll bring lachme toida, either chametz or matzah, my choice. But what he did bring was seer. Now says the Gemara, let's analyze your question. Seer the man, whose seer are you referring to? Seer the rameh. Are you talking about the seer rameh, which is when they became pale, right? All it is pale. There's no cracks. The cracks are called karnei chagov, like the horns of of these grasshoppers or locusts. I'm not talking about that. That's according to the Meir is already chametz mamish. So seer is only pale. Are we talking about the stage that it's pale according to Rabbi Yehuda? Matzah ma'isa. Rabbi Yehuda holds that if it's pale, it's regular matzah. So what's a shaila? It's matzah. So what if it's what it was Navas? Either Rabbi Yehuda, we're talking about the seer of Rabbi Yehuda. The seer of Rabbi Yehuda is when there are cracks. The horns of Chagavim, they're cracks, but they didn't join yet. So you have to burn it. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't even get malchus. And according to the Meir, and you want to know, so you're asking seer of Rabbi Yehuda, that stage, according to Rameir, if that's what you brought, can you be Yaitze, Chametz, or Matzah? Rameir holds that is 100% Chametz. Chametz, so what's the Shaila? You bring it in your carbon toida as the 10 loaves of Chametz. Novos, the Rameir, if you're talking about seer of Rameir, according to Rameir, which is it's pale, but Rameir says not only you have to burn it, you get malchus, which means if you get malchus, then it's chametz. But the local chametz is mamish chametz. So again, you're yaitze your carbon toide with the 10 loaves, that's chametz. Ella, the Rabbi Yehuda must be, you're talking about Rabbi Yehuda's seer, which is when you really have cracks in the dough, but Rabbi Yehuda holds you don't get malchus. According to Rabbi Yehuda, so how does he halachically treat it? Okay, you have to burn it, but you don't get malchus, which means it's not really, it has an aspect of chametz, but it's not really chametz. Mai, do we say sveika have? We don't know whether it's chametz or not. Whether at this stage is it like chametz because you have to burn it, or we say it's not really chametz, it's still matzah, you don't get malchus. So there's nothing with malchus. The malchus you ate your carbon because you said I have a choice, matzah or chametz, whichever it is, he did. Ideal, perhaps Ber Yehu. Perhaps this is according to Rabbi Yehuda. This is called seer. Seer is not chametz, no matzah. It's a separate entity altogether. And my neder was I'm going to bring chametz or matzah with a carbon and if we're not yaitzer, but enough, we're not yaitzer. Says the Gemara, I don't understand your whole shaila. Didn't Rav Huna say if a person says I'm going to make a neder that I'm going to bring the lachmei toida, automatically you got to bring a carbon toida with it because everyone knows that the bread is ancillary to the animal. So you bring in the carbon, and the carbon toida requires 30 matzah and 10 chametz. So what's you're saying the manushach yaitze? What do you mean manushach yaitze? If it's chametz or matzah, you never yaitze. How can it be yaitze? You don't know what else to bring. If it's chametz, I don't have to bring any more chametz. I just bring 30 loaves of matzah. If it's matzah, then I just bring 20 loaves of matzah and 10 of chametz. So what do you mean I'm yaitze? I'm stuck. And you can't just bring extra just willy-nilly because you bring a chulin, into the base of English. Avuna said, I bring bread of toida and maybe toida. You got to bring an animal as well. The lachma and his bread. The kivan the chayle b'toida v'lachma. And since now he has to bring an animal and he has to bring bread, he has no idea if what he brought was chametz. Therefore, the less say matzah, all he has to bring is 30 loaves of matzah. Or imatzahu, or what I brought, these 10 this year, it has treated like matzah, so I got to bring 20 matzah and 10 chametz. The lazy chametz has to bring chametz. And therefore, he has to bring anyway the correct amount. He has to still bring 30, 100% matzahs and 10% and 10, 100% chametz in order to be yaitzer. So what's your shaila? He can't be yaitzer with the 10 that he brought because manusha doesn't work here. Because you need to bring a total of 40. You have to make sure you have 40. So you're going to bring 30 matzahs, 10 chametz, and the 10 that you brought as suffix is not part of it. Says the Gemara. No, it's talking like our question is talking about a case. The Amadi said, "How do you like challah? I'm bringing challah lifter toidose shel pliny, not for myself. I'm bringing challah to help out that person who's bringing his own carbon toida." Says the Gemara, what do you gain by saying that? That person now doesn't know how much to bring. Should he bring 30 matzahs because he's yaitze the 10 chametz you brought, seer is chametz, or is a seer matzah needs to bring 10 chametz or 20 matzah? So I say, matzah. He doesn't know if it's chametz, if he has to bring matzah, or the seer is matzah, leise chametz. So what's your shaila? Doesn't help. Of course, you have to ignore what you, since seer, we don't know what it is. There's no mamon of shech over here. You have to bring 30 matzah and 10 chametz. We're talking about it. We need it. The loy omar lifter meifik gavri they need nafik. He didn't say that I'm bringing this to help out this guy. He didn't say that I'm doing this, that this guy should be yaitz or something. It's not what he said at all. What he said is that is the question. I'm just adding on another 10 to whatever he did. is made for Gabri, they need enough in my yaitz, my neder. All I did was I said I'm going to add to whatever he did or not. Now, what do I do with these 10? What do you mean add? That person's going to bring 40 loaves, 30 matzah, 10 chametz, and you can't add 10 more. But what it means is that there's kedusha now of these loaves of bread. I'm going to sell it, redeem it, and with that money, I'm going to use it for a proper carbon trader. So the question is does it become holy because I said this? I donated seer and I said I want it to be like that person's matzahs, like that person's carbon trader. But what's the story here? Is it a separate entity or is it chametz and matzah? Because if it's chametz and matzah, monoshach, I don't care. It became a carbon trader. I sell it, and with the money I use to buy a carbon trader. But if seer is a separate entity altogether, it never became kodesh because I just added on to his trader, but it doesn't have it. Seer is not part of it. So therefore, the Gemara Teiku brings a question. But now the Gemara has these rules, so we continue. Because the Gemara, if he says kosher, the din is kosher b'pora, that which is kosher by pora duma is possible by egla, is disqualified when it comes to egla rufa. Somebody was found dead between two cities. We measure which city is the closest, and then we say that city brings a carbon, and the bezin brings a carbon, and the laws that deal with egla rufa, which is arufa, which we break with an axe, we break it from the back, we bring it to nachalesa, and is very different than by a pora duma, as the Bryce will explain the difference. And kosher be'egla, that which we do, the appropriate method for an egla is possible b'pora. Had you done that to a pora duma, it would be possible. So by pora duma, you take it and you shech it outside in harazayim, and then you burn the entire animal mizbeach, and then with the ashes you put in mayim chaim el keli, you have a keli, and you have spring water, and you mix it in that cup. That's what you do with pora duma. So Tanabam we learned. Para b'shchita ksheda, para duma. What do you meant? How you meant to kill it? Through shechting it. Arifa, but if you did arifa, if you went through the back and you chopped it up, psula, it's possible. Egla, when it comes to egla rufa, the other way around. But arifa ksheda, the only way to do it is through arifa, by with an axe and chopping it back. If you went and shechted an egla rufa, you'd possible. Nimtza. So the conclusion is kosher b'pora, that which is kosher by pora is possible by egla, is possible by an egla, and kosher by egla, that which is kosher by egla is possible by pora. Says the Gemara, so why don't you make a kavachem as what we learned in the last few days? But let us say that para aduma is ksheda ba'arifa. Let us say that if you did arifa, para aduma, it should work. And why is that? Hakavachem. What's a kavachem? Umadach egla shlehuch shla b'shchita. Madach egla rufa that isn't kosher by shchita. Huch shla ba'arifa. If you shecht an egla rufa, it's possible. It says egla ha'arufa. It has to be a rufa. And yet, by egla rufa, you do arifa. So para which l'chayda seems to be more lenient. V'araya, you can use shchita. Shehuch shel b'shchita, you can use shchita. Einadin, surely shehuch shel arifa. You should be able to take a paraduma and just do arifa. Says the Gemara Amakra. It says in Pasik. It says b'shochat by a paradum. It says in Pasik you should take it outside of the camp. And b'shochat you should shecht it, and then the whole parsha paradum begins with zois chukas haTorah. And we generally have a rule whenever it says chukah, means this is how it meant to be done. In other words, b'shochat the chukah. This is part of the chukah that has to be done through shchita. B'shchita in ma'arifa loy. It has to be done through shchita and not through any other method. Says the Gemara. So what do you tell me? Because it says the word chukah, we cannot expand at all. Only what's written in the Torah. Is that really the case? Whatever says chukah, we don't dash the kavachem. Let me ask you a question. Look, Abba Yom Kippurim, by Yom Kippur, you take two animals that are shoving b'marav v'kaima, two animals that look exactly the same, identical, and then we make a goydel, and one animal ends up being a carbon chatas, and the other one gets thrown off the cliff, gets thrown off the azazel. If you pronounce without a goydel, this should be the chatas, this should be the azazel, and then you make a goydel, the goydel overturns your pronouncement. And Gabba Yom Kippurim, it says chukah by Yom Kippur, right? And Vitanya, and we actually learned. So it says in Pasik that the kohen should bring this soyer, that it was a goydel was Hashem, and he should make it into a chatas. So it sounds like hagoydel also, because in the Pasik also asher Allah hagoydel Hashem was a chatas. It's the goydel that makes it a chatas. The ein Hashem is a chatas, but if you would pronounce, the kohen God will say, oh, this animal should be a chatas. It doesn't happen because why do you need a pasuk? Because I would have thought. Madach in a place where the girdle has no effect. Let's say a zav or your letters has to bring two birds. One is a chatas and one is a oila. If you make a girdle, you make a draw lottery, and you take two blocks over there, and one you write chatas on a girdle, and you draw for each one. And then afterwards, the kohen says that this should be a chatas or oila. the Kohen's word is final, and the Geidel has absolutely no bearing whatsoever. So Ma'adach in a place, Shalai Kiddush HaGeidel, Geidel has no effect. Yet Kiddush Hashem, you pronounce which is what, and that's how it works. So Malkum Shekiddush HaGeidel, by the Karbonos on Yom Kippur, where the Geidel is effective, ain't it surely Shekiddush Hashem that the Kohen can go ahead and say this should be a Chatas and this should be a puzzle. And if you change it around at all, it should be a azazel. If you change it around at all, it should be puzzle, because he basically activated or affected that this should become the chatas and this should become the oila. And how do we know that doesn't work? It says, it says in puzzle, the geidel is the only method you can use to turn this animal into a chatas. Otherwise, without that pasuk, we would have used the kal v'chomer. But how can you? By Yom Kippur, it says chukah. Because it says chukah, it says Yom Kippur. So l'chayda, you said whenever it says chukah, that's it. You can't expand at all using logic, kal v'chomer, anything. So why need a pasuk so chatas? The only reason how we know is because it says the pasuk was so chatas that the geidel makes a chatas. Not for that. We would use the kal v'chomer and say, well, if the kohen pronounced it, this is the chatas, this would have been effective. Is therefore. So we see clearly that a chatas, that a kal v'chomer can be expanded even when it says chukah. So it goes back to our question: how come you can't use arifa when it comes to a paraduma? Kal v'chomer, if you can use shchita, surely you can use arifa. Says you know how you know. Miyat rachmana gabe egla arufa. By egla arufa it says egla ho arufa. You know the principle. Hey, zois barifa. Only by the egla arufa we're going to use this method. The ain ached barifa, nowhere else, not even paraduma. So that's how we know to exclude paraduma from arifa. Says Gemara. So now let's make the reverse kal v'chomer. So v'tehei egla ksheida b'shchita. Let's say now the egla arufa you can shecht. And the kal v'chomer goes as follows: the kal v'chomer ma'adach para shalahuch shabarifa. You can't use arifa. Yaksheida b'shchita you can shech egla sheksheida b'arifa. Egla which is kosher b'arifa, right? You do arifa. Ein adin surely shahuch shabashchita should be kosher b'shchita. Makro. Therefore, it says in pasuk va'arfu sham esa egla. You should go ahead and you should make the egla. So it's like twice it says the va'arfu before arufa. It says va'arfu to tell you that only this animal you do arufa, and there's no other method that you can use. You cannot use shchita like shan olav akatzav la'akav akatchim. It says twice the same thing. We mean this is the only method of doing it. So that ends the Gemara for today. And we'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah.